Do note that the incorrect examples are purposefully exaggerated so that the issues are easier to see. In my opinion, the correct examples are good enough at showing what they are supposed to, however, they are far from perfect. As an exercise, see if you can spot issues in my form in the correct examples. If you do, leave a comment down below. In this episode, we will be taking a look at, in my opinion, the most common cut in medieval fencing systems, the descending cut. We will be only going through full long edge cuts, point inline cuts, and short edge cuts will be done in later episodes. At this time, all cuts will be done standing still. Stepping is a complex subject and there will be a full episode dedicated to it. Transitions, such as chaining multiple cuts, parry riposts, and such, will also have a dedicated episode later on. If you have skipped straight to this episode, I would highly recommend that you watch the episodes 1 and 2 first. I would also recommend that you watch the Why and How to Train Cutting and Recipe for Successful Cuts episodes. The links are in the description. In this episode, any exercise which is done without a solid target requires you to listen for the sword wind. Sword wind is explained in detail in the Why and How to Train Cutting episode. Again, the link is in the description. Shortly, sword wind is the sound the sword makes when it travels through air. To make the sound, the sword must be moving fast enough and the edge must be properly aligned. The louder the sound and the higher the pitch, the better. Do note that a sword will make a dull whooshing sound if the edge is poorly enough aligned, such as cutting with the flat. You also want the sword wind to start as early in the cut as possible and last as long as possible. Again, a more in-depth explanation is in the episode Why and How to Train Cutting. Later in this episode, there will be a section about cutting angle. During all other sections, presume a 45-degree angle. The 45-degree angle is a good one to practice in as it requires equal horizontal and vertical movement. In my opinion, this also makes it one of the most challenging angles to cut in. Having a specific angle when cutting is important so you learn to control your trajectory. If you don't train with a specific angle in mind, you might learn to cut with a different random angle every time. This might lead to you not being able to control your trajectory. This makes targeting extremely difficult. It should also be obvious that this is martially rather unwanted. When cutting tatami, a 45-degree angle is also rather optimal. With more vertical cuts, you will be using more tatami with each cut. With more horizontal cuts, you will be cutting more against the grain, making the cut more difficult. With horizontal cuts, there is also less support on the tatami, as it is only held in place at the bottom. In my opinion, a 45-degree angle is not that good in a martial sense. For descending and ascending cuts, I tend to use a more vertical angle. Generally for descending cuts, I imagine an in from the shoulder, out from the waist kind of an angle. Because of this, I recommend that you start your training with a 45-degree cut. After you can do that consistently, learn to cut at any specific angle. After you can do that consistently, you should do most of your cutting training at an angle which you actually use when fencing. Every now and then, you should come back to the cutting angle exercises so that your skills don't get rusty. Now, a final safety notice before we continue to the exercises. In this episode, we will not cut towards our front leg. This means that if we are cutting from our dominant side, we will be having our dominant side foot forwards. This is a safety precaution with descending cuts, as there is a very small chance that if you cut towards your front foot, you might cut yourself. This might happen if your structure or grip is not good enough. You might lean and end up cutting your leg. Or if your grip is loose, the sword might rotate in your hand and once again end up hitting your leg. As cutting towards your front leg is martially rather common occurrence, this is still a skill you should have. However, I stress, do not try this before you are very consistent and comfortable with basic descending cuts. You must be able to stop your sword without a fail. I highly recommend that you do not try this before you have learned to do point-in-line cuts. More about those in the episode about power generation. Now, without further ado, let's get to the exercises. In this section, I will be explaining the basic exercises from the dominant side. As I will be going very in depth with these exercises, this episode will be split in 2 parts. The first part will only contain the basic exercises. In the second part, I will then explain the differences for doing the exercises from the non-dominant side. There is no need to learn all of the progressions from the dominant side before starting with the progressions on the non-dominant side. For now, we will be doing the exercises from an overhead guard. In the German system, this is called a high vom Tag or just a vom Tag. Do note that we will be doing these cuts from the overhead guard in a 45-degree angle for the practice reasons mentioned earlier. In actual fencing applications, you would most likely cut in a steeper angle. In the second part of this episode, we will also be taking a look on how to adapt these exercises to a guard on the shoulder. If you have access to a PEL, I recommend that you do these exercises with that in addition to doing them in the air. However, also do remember to do them in the air. Before doing any of these exercises, remember to warm up properly. Here is how you properly construct the starting position for all the progressions in this section. Have your dominant foot forward. Remember to have a good wide stance with your knees bent. You probably should have a wider and deeper stance than you think. Front foot's toes pointing forwards, back foot's angled to the side so that the stance feels comfortable. Have your weight evenly distributed on both legs. Hold your sword in a proper handshake grip straight in front of you at shoulder height. You want to have your both arms properly extended. To achieve this, you need to rotate your shoulders so that the dominant shoulder is slightly forward. Make sure that the sword is correctly centered. Now, just by rotating your shoulders, bring the sword over your head. You should do this so that the center of mass is roughly above your head. This makes holding the sword easier. Loosen your grip so that you don't tire your hands. This can be done by undoing the ringing motion by letting your wrists rotate away from each other. Do not let the point sag behind. Make sure that your shoulders are in a neutral position. Make sure that you have a neutral spine and hip positions and that you are not leaning in any direction. You are now standing in the starting position of the following exercise. We will be following the concept of start simple, add complexity. These exercises are designed so that the following ones will be building on top of the earlier ones. This allows us to have a smaller subset of things to concentrate on in the first exercise. Also, do not try to learn new exercises or new progressions too soon. As counterintuitive it might sound, it actually will slow down your learning. If you are trying to learn too many things at once, the chance of making mistakes increases. If you then continue training, you will be learning these incorrect executions into muscle memory. Overwriting existing muscle memory is a pain in the ass and will take a considerable amount of time. Because of this, take your time and only move to new progressions and exercises when you are already comfortable with the current ones. I will now take some time to explain the idea behind the first exercise, because it is one of those exercises you should not do too much. In fact, the way of cutting in the first exercise is far from optimal. However, in addition to reducing the number of variables, it is also teaching an important skill which is not present in the following progressions. In this exercise, you will be cutting without powering the cut from your hips or legs. Instead, try to keep your hips in place and only rotate your shoulders. To do this, you must learn to activate your core muscles separate from your hip movement. When you are cutting from the ground up, you only need to brace your core to link your hips and shoulders. That way, you might not learn to rotate from your core at will. However, you are not always in a position where you can effectively rotate from your hips. Or, in fact, you might be in a situation where you have to rotate your hips and shoulders in opposite directions. One of such situations might be standing in a high guard with sword on your right shoulder, left foot forwards. You parry an attack to the left side of your head. Your opponent retreats while leaving himself open. To close the distance, you must take a passing step with your right foot. The most effective cutting line, on the other hand, is from left to right, as you already loaded the cut when parrying. Now, to do this properly, you need to rotate your hips counterclockwise when stepping, and simultaneously you need to rotate your shoulders clockwise to cut. If you do not do the following exercise, you might need to do specialty training for these kinds of specific situations. However, if you learn from the beginning to activate the muscles you want when you want to, you don't really need to do any specialty training. Remember that the point of this progression is to learn to activate your core and generate rotation from it. Try to limit your hip movement, but do not overfixate on it. Some hip rotation is just fine as long as you are not powering the cut from your legs and hips. As a reminder, do note that the incorrect examples are exaggerated, so that the mistakes are easier to spot. In reality, the mistakes are usually smaller and harder to notice. Now, let's begin with the first progression. Stand in the starting position. Rotate your shoulder line roughly 45 degrees to your dominant side. Keep your face towards your target in front of you. Try not to rotate your hips. If you can't rotate your shoulders far enough, turn your hips only as much as you need to, and only after you have already rotated your shoulders. Rotate your wrists to bring your sword to a 45-degree angle. This way, the sword's edge is already pointing to the direction of the cut. Tighten your grip. Brace your core. Bring your arms forward until they are correctly centered and extended. You can think of this as bringing your hands to the top corner of a square. Your aim is to cut to the opposite corner in a straight line. Start rotation from your core while bringing your arms down in a 45-degree angle. Let your structure stop your cut. Stop bracing and loosen your grip. Return to the starting position. Repeat. You should start this exercise by cutting at a relaxed speed. Make sure not to artificially slow down the cut. As you learn to synchronize your rotations to produce a cut at a 45-degree angle and learn to keep a solid structure, slowly start to add speed to your cuts. Keep doing this exercise until you can properly sync your core rotation and arms and hear the sword wind. At this point, do not worry too much about hearing the sword wind through the whole cutting arc. By limiting your hip rotation, you are limiting your power generation, which will definitely make it more difficult to produce a good sword wind. However, just making the sword wind should not be too difficult. As long as you can consistently make a cut producing a sword wind at a 45-degree angle, you can move to the next progression. After this, you do not want to return to this progression too often. As said, it is not an optimal way to cut. If you feel that you need to practice syncing your rotation or activating your core, it might be worth it to come back for a little while. I would not recommend trying to cut tatami or other cutting media with this progression as it limits your power generation so much. Instead, first learn the next progression and then you can start cutting media. With this progression, the most important thing to concentrate on is the syncing of your core and arm rotations. Your hands should always be centered. This means that all of the sword's horizontal movement comes from your core rotation, and all of the vertical movement comes from your shoulder rotation. You should cut through the imaginary target in front of you at shoulder height. As you started rotated roughly 45 degrees to your dominant side, you should stop rotated roughly 45 degrees to your non-dominant side. Again, if you need to rotate your hips for more range of motion, only do so after you have rotated your shoulders as far as they go. If you are going noticeably further than this, it means you are overswinging. This means that there is too much horizontal rotation. It also means that you are probably not cutting at a 45-degree angle. The restriction on your hip movement should limit the chance of overswing, so only try to rotate your shoulders. You should ask someone to watch your cutting from the front, video yourself cutting from the front, or cut in front of a mirror to make sure that you are actually cutting at a 45-degree angle. In addition to this, concentrate on the following. Make sure your feet are on the full tripod during the cut. Keep facing your target. Don't lean. Remember to return back to the starting position. Here are some of the most common issues with this exercise and how to fix them. This means that you are either bringing your arms down too fast or rotating from your core too fast. If possible, have someone watch you from the front or cut in front of a mirror or some other reflective surface. If this is not possible, videotaping your cutting from the front is the second best option. Then correct your core or shoulder rotations accordingly. You rotate too far in the end position. You should always stop at the end position and see where your center is pointing. If it's pointing too far, concentrate on limiting your rotation during the cut. There are two types of edge alignment issues which are common with this progression. The first one is that your edge is aligned properly for a 45-degree cut, but your rotations are off sync. In this case, fix the off sync issues as explained previously. The second one is that your rotations are in sync and your trajectory is correct for a 45-degree cut, but your sword is turned in your hand. This can be caused by an uneven grip, in which case make sure you are giving even rotation and pressure with both of your hands. More commonly, your wrists are turned so that the sword is pointing in the wrong direction, or you are holding the sword incorrectly in your hand in the first place. To fix this, do the cut very slowly and stop when your hands are at shoulder level. Then see which one of the previously mentioned things is causing the issue. People have a tendency to start the cut by pulling their elbows towards their hip. Instead, lock out your elbows to keep your arm straight and rotate from the shoulder. This might be an issue with both or just one of your arms. For example, some people might bend the elbow of their dominant arm while keeping their non-dominant arm properly extended. This is easy to see if you stop at the end position of the cut. If you are not standing straight, slow down your cuts and concentrate on your structure. If you are bending at the waist, make sure you are bracing properly. If you are tilting at your hips, you are most likely letting your hips go backwards. Make sure you concentrate on keeping your hips in place. It can be easier to maintain a straight trajectory if you lean so that you can cut at any angle with only shoulder rotation. This makes it easy to keep center and removes all co-rotational issues from the equation. However, this will make it very difficult to do transitions. Make sure that you stand upright with a neutral posture. The cut should come to a stop because your arms come in contact with your chest. Keep your shoulders relaxed. This is most often caused by leaning, which was explained earlier. Another common issue with trajectory is that you pull up one of your shoulders during the cut. Most often this is the non-dominant shoulder. In this case, concentrate on keeping your shoulders in a neutral position. Another common issue is uneven extension. This was also explained previously. Now, let's move to the second progression of this exercise. In this progression, we will be powering the cut from our legs instead of just from our core. Stand in the starting position. Rotate your hip so that your chest points roughly 45 degrees to your dominant side. If you can't rotate your hips far enough, angling the toes of your back foot to point more forwards or having a wider stance might help. You can also continue the rotation from your core as in the previous progression. However, you should now first rotate from your hips and only after that continue rotating only your shoulder line. Keep your face toward your target in front of you. Rotate your wrists to bring your sword to a 45-degree angle. Tighten your grip, brace your core. Bring your arms forward until they are correctly centered and extended. Power the rotation from your legs while bringing your arms down in a 45-degree angle. Let your structure stop your cut. Stop bracing and loosen your grip. Return to the starting position. Repeat. Again, you should start this progression by cutting at a relaxed speed and making sure that you don't artificially slow down the cut. As you learn to sync your rotations and to keep a proper structure, start gradually adding more speed to your cuts. You should continue training this progression until you can properly sync your hip and shoulder rotations and clearly hear the sword wind. Aim to make the sword wind louder and cover a longer part of the cutting arc than with the previous progression. After you can do that consistently, move to the next progression. At this point, you are also ready to cut tatami and other cutting media. You should not do any special adjustments to these progressions for cutting media. Just cut as the target was not there. You just need to make sure that you are at a correct distance. For a more detailed explanation, please see the cutting and reading tatami episode. The link is in the description. However, before cutting any cutting media, you might want to watch the targeting section of the next half of this episode. With this progression, keep in mind all of the things explained in the previous progression. As a new thing to keep in mind with this progression is keeping your head level. The previous progression was designed to minimize the risk of rising or lowering during the cut. Now that you are powering the cut from your legs, you actually need to move them. Most often, people don't have an issue of dropping down during the cut. Most people straighten their legs too much, making them rise up during the cut. This is easy to notice if you can see at what level the top of your head is during the cut. It should stay completely still. If you rise or lower yourself during the cut, it will make the blade move more vertically. This will naturally affect the trajectory. The other new thing to concentrate on is keeping your feet fully rooted on the tripod during the cut. If your feet are pointing in proper directions, your stance is wide enough, and you are not overswinging, you should not have any problem with this. Naturally, the range of motion of your hips and core might cause issues with this. If you feel uncomfortable rotation in your knees during the cut, and changing your stance doesn't help, it is safer to let your feet rotate slightly than trying to keep them fully planted. With this progression, the most common issues are the same as with the previous one. Overswing is now more common as you are rotating your hips. In addition to these, there is the previously mentioned issue of rising and lowering during the cut. It is easy to notice if you keep an eye on the movement of the top of your head. Once again, a mirror or a training partner is the easiest way for noticing this. If you have an issue with this, you can easily practice powering the cut from your legs without a sword. Simply stand in a fencing position and rotate from your legs while concentrating on keeping your head level. Now, for the third progression of this exercise. In this one, we are concentrating on removing the tell of bracing and tightening our grip before the cutting motion. There will still be the tell from the preparatory rotation towards the dominant side. However, this is only a byproduct of how this exercise is designed. I chose the starting position so that it is actually comfortable to stand in. In the episode about stepping, we will be cutting from a position where there will be no need for a preparatory rotation. Stand in the starting position. Rotate your hips so that your chest points roughly 45 degrees to your dominant side. Keep your face towards your target in front of you. Rotate your wrists to bring your sword to a 45-degree angle. While bringing your arms forward until they are correctly centered and extended, tighten your grip and brace. Only start to tighten your grip and brace after you have started to move your arms. Make sure you have a proper grip and have braced before your arms are fully centered and extended. Power the rotation from your legs while bringing your arms down in a 45-degree angle. Let your structure stop your cut. Stop bracing and loosen your grip. Return to the starting position. Repeat. In the beginning, you can take time to extend and position your arms so you have enough time to brace and grip. After that, stop for a moment and then cut. As you learn to time your gripping and bracing, you should start to blend the extension of your arms and the cutting into a single action. Instead of stopping after you have your arms in the correct position, simply proceed to cut immediately. As you learn to do that, start speeding up the extension and centering part of the movement. Your end goal is to blend it seamlessly into the cutting action. This progression of the exercise should become a staple in your training routine. Even when you progress to exercises in which you start to cut from different guard positions, or add actions to before or after the cut, you should still come back to this basic exercise from time to time. In my opinion, this is the father and mother of all cuts done with any bladed weapon, whether it's with a step or without one. Too many people skip this very basic form of a descending cut in favor of descending cuts from other guard positions. The most common issue people have with this progression is edge alignment. You are now doing multiple things simultaneously while trying to tighten your grip. This can lead to making more mistakes. This is why start simple, add complexity is such an important concept. The most common edge alignment issue comes from having an uneven grip and twisting the sword one way or another. The second most common one is not having your wrists aligned correctly. Remember to start by extending your arms and bringing them to the center while tightening your grip and bracing and then stopping. See that your grip is proper and edge aligned. Only then proceed to cut. If you fail to have a proper grip and edge alignment, reset the exercise and try again. Proceed to gripping and cutting in one motion only after you can consistently tighten your grip while extending and centering your arms. The fourth progression of this exercise will be keeping the cutting portion exactly the same. Instead, we will be adding movement. As said, cutting with a step will be handled in an episode of its own. In this progression, we will be taking a look at closing in and retreating from a target. As distance is the focus of this and the next progression, I recommend that you do them with a target you can cut over. You can simply use a piece of clothing or something similar tossed to the ground. Or you can cut over an empty cutting stand if you have access to one. I recommend something elevated, such as an empty cutting stand, as it makes reading the distance easier and you don't have to look at the ground to see your target. For a detailed explanation of a proper cutting distance, please see the episode A Recipe for Successful Cuts. The link is in the description. Stand in the starting position some distance, such as 3 meters away from your target. Close into the correct cutting distance using simple advancing steps. Stop. You should aim to be able to end up in a proper cutting stance without needing to shuffle your feet in place. Cut as explained in the previous progression and return to the starting position. Stop. Retreat from the target using simple backwards advancing steps until you are where you started. Concentrate on making sure you end up at the correct distance. This should be done by varying your step distance as required. You should also vary your starting distance so that the exercise doesn't boil down to counting steps. As you start getting comfortable with the exercise, you should start returning to a different guard when retreating. Make sure you make a complete cut first and only then return to a guard. Basically, Complete the cut by letting your structure bring the sword to a stop. Stop bracing and relax your grip. Return to any guard position in the fencing system you train. Stop. Retreat from the target back to where you started. More rapid transitions will be handled in the transition episode. Retreating to different directions, such as past the target, will be handled in the stepping episode. Most common issues with this progression are incorrect distance to the target and a bad cutting stance. Incorrect distance is caused by not varying your step length correctly based on your distance to the target. This can be caused by misreading the distance to the target in the first place. The best way to gauge distance is to watch directly from the side and to use a high enough stand. Once again, a training partner or a video are the best ways to do this. A bad cutting stance is usually caused by advancing in a too narrow stance and not correctly widening it when you stop to cut. If you close in a narrow stance, you should end up with a proper cutting stance with your last step. When cutting media, it is recommended that you close in a guard. You can close in as explained in this or the next progression. You should learn not to measure your distance to the target using your sword before cutting. Instead, close in, pause if need be, then cut. You can then stay in distance while doing the rest of the cuts on the mat. After you are done, return to a guard and retreat from the target. The fifth progression is the same as the fourth one, but we will be closing in and retreating from the target in a different way. In this progression, we will be walking in a more natural way instead of using simple advancing steps. This time, close in and retreat using crossing steps, while keeping your hips and shoulders pointing in a single direction. In other words, you let your rear foot pass your front foot when stepping with it. You will also walk in a narrow stance when compared to your cutting stance. Walking like this makes it more difficult to end up at the correct distance, as you cannot end up with your legs crossed. In addition to remembering to land the last step with your front foot, you have to remember to correctly widen your stance. Again, you can return to the starting position and retreat in that, or you can choose any other guard from your fencing system. The fourth and fifth progressions should become staples of your training regime, as they are excellent for training distance. When you want to do more repetitions of the cut, the third progression is usually a better choice. However, you should add some of the fourth and fifth progressions to most of your training sessions. All of the progressions in the basic exercise can also be done with a bell. It doesn't matter if it's a wooden bell, a hanging bell, a tire bell, or some other kind of a bell. As long as you can hit it with a sword or a sword simulator, you should incorporate it into your training. Note that you should only start doing a progression with a bell after you are competent with it without a bell. With a bell, you are concentrating on slightly different things. Naturally, as you cannot do full cuts, stopping the sword is taken out of the equation. However, bells are excellent for follow-through, power generation, and grip strength exercises. Simply start doing the progression with low intensity. Your aim is to maintain edge alignment and pressure on the target on hit. If your sword turns on hit, either your edge alignment was off to begin with, or your grip was not strong enough. The issue could be your grip itself or the stabilization of your wrists. Also remember to have your elbows properly stabilized. If your sword bounces off the target instead of pressing against it, you do not have proper follow-through. You are hitting the target and not through it. You should imagine cutting through the target and continuing to move your sword in a straight trajectory even after impact. After hitting the target, maintain the pressure for a second or two and then return to the starting position of the progression. The most common issues with PEL exercises are the following: lack of follow-through, edge alignment issues, improper extension, not leading with the tip. As explained before, the lack of follow-through means you are hitting the target, not through it. Remember to keep generating power even after impact. Again, as mentioned, edge alignment issues are usually caused by lack of grip strength or wrist stabilization. There are two possible extension issues. One is not having enough extension. In other words, your arms are bent. Remember to fully extend your arms. The other is overextending your elbows. If you feel any pain when hitting the target, it is very likely that you are overextending your elbows and the impact is hurting your elbow joint. If this happens, immediately stop training and let your elbows rest to prevent any further damage to them. See the first episode in this series for an in-depth explanation and extension. The link is in the description. If your cuts turn into slices instead of cuts on impact, you are not leading with the tip. This is usually caused by not having a proper extension of the arms or not having a proper handshake grip. There is a more in-depth explanation of leading with the tip in the Recipe for Successful Cuts episode. In the previous episode of this series, there is a proper explanation of a handshake grip. The links are in the description. That was the basics of descending cuts. This episode is cut into two parts, and this was the first one of those. Take your time with the basic exercise. Remember that cutting is a skill which takes time to learn. Before you go to train, stab that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. In the next part of this episode, we will be taking a look how to do these basic exercises from the non-dominant side. We will also be taking a look on targeting and angling your cuts. We will also be taking a look how to do the descending cut from a guard on the shoulder. See you in the second part of this episode.